There aren't simple inputs into the AI yet. So because we bring that human touch and that human psychology and working with people, we're not on the chopping block anytime in the next few years. But I think in the era of AI, that's what we've got to think more and more about, is what's the value of working with the human being? What can human beings do that AI can't do? And I think a lot of that is to do with questions of emotional intelligence or also creativity.
I'm just adjusting my screen. Why is it putting that way? I want you to be on the top. Okay, it's doing it like that. All right, cool. I'll rip into it. Hello and welcome. You're listening to Dashdot Insider, the auditory epicenter for passionate property investors seeking a life of freedom, choice, and abundance. Joining me today, another one of our very special clients. I'm talking today with Peter van der Merwe. And Peter has a very interesting perspective on property that I think is going to be really, really useful for people. And the reason, for everyone listening, the reason why I think this is interesting is because Peter works in an area that is now starting to get affected by AI. And so maybe just to start off with, Peter, can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Good afternoon, Emil, and hello to all the Dashdot listeners. I lead a company called Bright Circle. We're a team of technical writers who specialize in writing tender responses for construction companies, helping them win major infrastructure construction projects around Australia, but mostly in Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland. And we also do a little bit of legal writing and research, and we also work in the facilities maintenance industry on tenders. So yes, I have a background as a professional writer and editor.
Okay. And you've looked at property as, I'm not sure if this is the right phrase, so if you can think of a better one, let me know, but as a little bit of a backup plan or a plan B as AI starts to have more of an impact in your field. Is that about right?
Yes, that's what's happening now. I was initially looking at property investment for other reasons, wealth creation, long term. My dad worked in real estate his whole life, so I grew up with a real estate background. He was a real estate agent in South Africa, specializing in farm sales. So I grew up farming and with my dad knowing all the farms in our area of South Africa. So real estate's been in my family for a very long time. And then when my parents moved to Australia, my family moved to Australia just over 20 years ago. My dad continued to work as a real estate agent in Tasmania. So I've been around real estate for a long time, and it always just made sense to me that I would invest in real estate one day. And as my business grew and I had some money to invest, I had a little bit of a false start with trying to pick investment properties myself, and it wasn't disastrous, but it wasn't the results I was looking for. And then I was asking around, and a friend of mine recommended Dashdot, and I started listening to the podcast and finding out more about what you guys do. And I've now bought 2 properties through you. So yeah, it was initially a wealth creation exercise, but now as my industry is starting to be affected by AI, I need to diversify out of my current business into other things as well, or start working with AI. I'm still figuring it out. But the property portfolio is becoming a bit of a personal risk mitigation for me.
Right. Okay. That makes perfect sense. I've got the numbers up on the property. You've got one property over in WA. And the purchase price on that, for everyone listening, $485,000. That's a decent purchase price. To anyone looking to buy these days, if you can get in at $485,000, you're doing pretty well in the market. The yield on that was 6.22%. I'm not sure if yields that high are going to be around at the moment. But when you bought this was extremely good buying. The July val from this year, so July 2024, just a couple of months ago, it was $685,000. So the total growth in just 17 months has been $200K. So the return on your capital invested is 153.11%, right? So that's a lot of equity stacked away that you've managed to achieve in just 17 months. For a lot of people listening, $200,000, that can be multiples of a year's income. So property has kind of done what it said on the tin. I want to drill more into the AI side of things a little bit, because this is a really hot topic at the moment. AI at one end of the spectrum, or one spectrum, whatever we want to call it. In one way, it's improving a lot of people's lives. We're able to develop an AI tool here at Dashdot that allows us to pick the hotspots that get results like you've been able to achieve, which is fantastic, right? People's lives are better in this way. It's great for calculating lots of things. It's great for doing a lot of tedious work that we used to have to do, right? But it's also doing a lot of the creative work as well. That's the fun stuff that I think is like the human aspect. That's what makes life fun. But that's sort of being replaced, not just augmented, but being replaced in a big way. At least that's my perspective, looking from my position and what I see. As someone who's like face to face with AI directly, how worried do we need to be that it's going to take everyone's jobs and everything's going to be run by AI? And if you don't have a plan, what's your take?
Well, this is a hot topic of the last few years, and I guess it's entering more and more industries. And the thing that I've seen is that it hasn't really significantly changed business models yet in my industry. In other words, people haven't really figured out a way of finding a way to make it save a lot of money or a lot of time in my specific industry yet, which is technical writing. I know in other industries it is. And I think when it actually starts changing business models and people figure out how to harness AI to make a lot of money or save a lot of time, that's when it's really going to start potentially replacing people and losing jobs. But I have quite an interesting perspective on this. I think a lot of it has to do with value. When AI starts doing tedious, formulaic, repetitious work, that's work that human beings don't necessarily love doing. So if AI can do it really well, then that's fantastic. And I think we need to start shifting our mindset towards what is special about what human beings can do. What is the value of the work that just human beings can do that AI can't do? And that's what I'm seeing in my industry is we have our writers are really skilled in working with subject matter experts in really complex, sort of emotionally complex situations. The information is quite complex. The stakeholders are complex, like who contributes where, if you have a clash of opinions, whose is more authoritative. So there aren't simple inputs into the AI yet. So because we bring that human touch and that human psychology and working with people, we're not on the chopping block anytime in the next few years. But I think in the era of AI, that's what we've got to think more and more about is what's the value of working with the human being? What can human beings do that AI can't do? And I think a lot of that is to do with questions of emotional intelligence or also creativity. Like, Emil, I know you're a musician as well. And anyone who's a musician has probably spent some time in the last 18 months tinkering around with the really amazing and potentially somewhat scary AI tools for musicians. And you can now, like with ChatGPT, you can tell several music AIs, please make me a reggae song about the Queen's corgis, and it'll think for 5 seconds and pump out a reggae song for you. And with things like AI image creation, you just put something in and you just tell it you want a sunset and a zebra DJing and it'll create it for you. So in that sense, yeah, I don't know whether it's going to replace creative people, but I think in the arts and in communications world, people do need emotional intelligence and that human touch. And I think for us as creative people, we've got to figure out what is it that humans can do differently to AI that makes our work valuable and irreplaceable.
I think my take on this is very similar to yours. I feel like AI is sort of coming for most jobs eventually. And so it's nice to have a little bit of a safe haven somewhere. And the way to do that is to have assets that are going to withstand AI pressures. Now, AI is great at being able to calculate things. It's not great at being somewhere to live, right? Because that's not what it is, right? It's just thinking is what, well, thinking in air quotes, right? That's what AI is, right? AI can't be a house. It can tell you how to build a house. It can design a robot that can assemble another robot, that can assemble another robot, that can assemble a house. It can design lots and lots of things, but it can't actually be those things. And so ownership can become really, really important in that respect. So people that own maybe stocks in AI companies, right? Because then you own part of the tech. Maybe owning metals, that's another asset class that people can look at. Maybe owning businesses cafes, things like that, where human interaction is valued, those seem to be places where it might make a bit of sense to put some assets, to store some of your value, store some of your wealth, so that it can be preserved and can generate more profit and things like that. Property seems to be a really good one as well, because it feels like it can withstand most things. A cafe, robot can come along and do that eventually. And then there'll be a more efficient robot. And then there'll be a more efficient robot. And so what are the humans really doing? And so those kinds of things, like depending on one's perspective and one's nature, AI could be ushering in a new era that is an absolute utopia and everything's wonderful. Or it could be an absolute apocalyptic dystopia where eventually Skynet becomes self-aware and kills all of us. And it wouldn't take long to kill all the humans in the world, right? It's about 6 hours, something like that, depending on which little report you read. If AI got powerful enough and could control enough stuff, then it could wipe us all out pretty efficiently. So you've kind of seen this coming along, and you've mentioned a couple of reasons, like the family reason for getting into property. How much was AI and your job situation a factor?
Oh, at the time I was getting into property, it was maybe about 7-8 years ago. So AI wasn't a factor then. It's become a factor. At the moment, I don't think it's a strong factor. It's more something that I'm seeing as a risk to my business, a risk and an opportunity. And if it's a risk to my business is primarily what I earn income from. So that's my borrowing capacity. That's my ability to be able to pay for my investments. So a risk to my business is indirectly a risk to my investments. So yes, it's become a risk. So yeah, as I said, I don't anticipate being completely out of a job for 5 to 10 years, maybe not ever. I think as newer technology emerges, our economy changes, our way of working changes, and we just have to think about ways of changing and adapting and looking for opportunities rather than having a doom and gloom mindset. I was listening to this interesting podcast a while ago where the person was talking about the industrial revolutions. Some sociologists often say that we're in the fourth industrial revolution now. And the industrial revolutions have been steam, electricity, computers. And if you look back in history, each time there was an industrial revolution, there's this whole social outcry of, oh, they're coming for our jobs. It's going to change the way we've worked forever. People are going to be starving in the streets. You know, like when steam started and factories, it replaced a whole lot of jobs. When electrification started, it replaced a whole lot of jobs. I mean, I walked over the main bridge in Melbourne a while ago. It's the one next to Flinders Street Station. It's still got the lamps from the Victorian era. And I think there's a little plaque there. I was reading something about how the job of lamplighter disappeared in the 1910s and the 1920s with electrification of the streets. And they've just kept those for historical reasons. But that's an example of a previous industrial revolution changing technology and the economy and the way things work. And so the job of lamplighter disappeared, but so many other jobs and opportunities were created anew. So yeah, every time there's a fundamental shift and an industrial revolution, we all tend to look on the negative side because we're going to experience change. But historically, it's tended to create a lot more opportunities. So I don't know, maybe AI has some uniquenesses that we can't anticipate yet, but I'm on the fence about it. And I think if you need to pick a side, I think it's best to look on the side of opportunity and novelty rather than doom and gloom. So yeah, I'm seeing my property portfolio as an alternative source of income in the future. But yeah, it's one function is in case something goes badly wrong with my business, but I'm planning on adapting and changing and continuing to grow my business, and my property portfolio is a sort of ancillary income.
Okay, so based on what you've said there, Peter, it sounds like AI is going to have an impact. You're creating yourself a nice kind of buffer, depending on what that impact could be, because sometimes it does change very, very quickly. And you cited the example with the lamplighters. That's a big one. There was a period back in the 1900s, early 1910s, around about then, when fossil fuels were discovered. And whaling, which had been the biggest industry in the world, just basically collapsed over the course of a year, 18 months, gone. And it's the biggest industry in the world, and now no one's doing it. And the world didn't fall to pieces completely. People end up doing different things, which I think is really, really important for people to realize and appreciate, right? It's not necessarily all doom and gloom. Similarly, horses were a massive, massive industry, right? Especially in New York. Henry Ford comes along with the motor car, and now there are only like 9 or 12 or 7 horses in New York City, and they're all in Central Park sort of thing. And that just happens just like that. So it can happen very, very quickly. That transition, I think, is what a lot of people worry about. And depending on whether or not they have transferable skills, if someone's just good at doing one thing, like if someone's entire skill set is just being a lawyer, for example, right? Just to choose a career at random. AI comes along, now can start writing contracts, can start thinking about everything. It's nowhere near that now, right? AI, ChatGPT can't even tell you how many hours are in strawberry at the time of recording this, right? It messes that up. I asked it yesterday. I was writing a piece, and I just wanted to check how many days are there between now. How many weekends are there between now and Christmas? And it said 30. I'm like, that sounds like it's more than half a year. And, at the time of recording this, we're in September. So I said, are you sure? And it said, yes, 30. So, okay. How many days are there between now and Christmas Day? And it said 105. So I said, okay, what's 105 divided by 7? And it said 15. So I said, so why did you tell me 30? And it says, oh, you're right. There are only 15 weekends until Christmas. So it has trouble counting things, right? They're still trying to iron out the creases. But eventually it's going to be sorted out, and it will be able to make legal contracts and things like that. If you're working in law, then it might get tricky to justify the massive fees and things like that people have to pay. Capitalism will do its job and maybe bring a lot of rates down and things like that, which will be good for consumers. But if you're a lawyer and that's the only thing that you can do, it could be a potentially pretty scary thing, because it's not necessarily an immediately transferable skill. It's not like someone is a chef and they lose their job. A restaurant closes down, they still have marketable skills and they can go and work in another restaurant, or they can end up in another career relating to food. They could become a food safety inspector or something like that, right? It's not something where there are tons and tons of new options. So I think it is scary for people that do have a career or a skill set that's not necessarily transferable. Nevertheless, even if you do have a very transferable skill set, that transition, it's tough for people, right? I mean, it's all very well, you and I have skill sets that I feel are fairly adaptable. A lot of people listening to this have skill sets that are more specialized and so less malleable to doing new things. And that transition can be tricky. And one of the things I think that really helps is having an asset buffer. If you have an asset buffer that just gives you a little bit of breathing room while you're making a transition, it can really take the pressure off. And that's where property becomes so important for people. My view on that, this is, and sorry, I'm speeching. I'm in lecture mode a little bit. Living in Japan, where society is fairly different in terms of their attitude towards money. In Australia and New Zealand, I've mentioned this on the podcast before, most people can survive a week. 2 weeks is tight, right? Because we're always leveraging to get more wealth, to accumulate more wealth. Saving is not incentivized. In Japan, saving is incentivized. And so these kinds of transitions that people have to go through, they're used to in Japan because they have a buffer. They have a buffer of cash that's just sitting in the bank. If someone loses their job, it's going to be hard to find another one. That's where the stress is. But the financial pressure is not so acute. In Australia, the financial pressure, you really start feeling it after a week or two, right? You can make 1 week. The second week, it's really tight. You need to talk to the bank. By the third week, you're starting to sell your stuff. Whereas in Japan, people can go sort of 18 months. And there's a big difference there. In Australia, I also feel that if you can build up a property portfolio over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that gives you that buffer so that when AI comes along, it's not the end of the world for you. It means that whatever it is that you're doing now that may be heavily impacted by AI, you've still got time to transition without putting yourself under an absolute ton of pressure. And I don't know many things that can take the pressure off as well as having a property portfolio can.
Yes, as you said earlier, AI can't build houses. When you were talking, I was thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like, the basic human needs for survival, food, shelter. And the higher you go up the hierarchy, the more kind of nice to have optional the needs become. But the ones at the bottom of the hierarchy are absolutely fundamental, like food, shelter. And yeah, housing is essential. Obviously, food is essential as well. So those are things that are going to remain hands-on industries. And as we know, Australia has a huge housing backlog for the population, and we don't have enough builders in Australia. So building like crazy is still not fixing the housing backlog. And that's housing economics is very complex, and I try and read about it and understand it as best I can. I don't have a very sophisticated understanding of it, which is partly why I wanted to work with Dashdot, because I know that I can't pick stocks myself and pick investment properties myself. But from what I do understand, there's a basic demand and supply problem as one of the drivers, is that the population is bigger than the housing supply. I think we're short of something like 10 or 20,000 houses in Australia. Maybe that number is not correct, but it's several tens of thousands of houses, and the rate of population growth and the rate of constructing new houses isn't closing that gap. So for a foreseeable future, for decades, there's going to be a shortage of housing in Australia, and that surely will continue to drive prices up.
I think you're 100% right. Supply demand is the economic equation that pretty much no one can really get around. And if we have a look at the supply of houses, in Australia, we're producing fewer than 200,000 houses per year at the moment, right? And the number of building approvals has steadily been going down over the course of the last 10 years. Every year it's been becoming less and less. So they say there's a housing crisis, and then the following year they build fewer than the year before. At the same time, so we have fewer than 200,000 building approvals for a 12-month period. At the same time, we're looking at numbers of what the immigration has been. The immigration for a 12-month period that we looked at was 737,000. Plus, we have natural population increase, right? More births than deaths of about 110,000 a year. So we're looking at about 850,000. And yet building approvals, that's not the ones that actually get built, right? These are just the approvals where the builder has got permission. We're at under 200,000. So that means that the average number of people per dwelling will be about 4.5. Now, at the moment in Australia, it's way below that. It's way below 4. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's going to be very, very, very tight. All of these things pushing the property market up and up and up. And we're also in a confluence between three big, massive paradigm shifting things. We've got AI, which we've talked about, and we're at risk of going down a pretty juicy rabbit hole, but I'll restrain myself. We have AI, we have globalization, right? This idea of 15-minute cities and control and all of that sort of thing. And we have the economic Armageddon and turmoil with the amount of inflation that's now getting pumped into our economies that are destabilizing things. And the US is in a lot of trouble, and there's a downstream effect. And is there going to be a big shift to a hard currency, or what's going to happen? And all three of these things are pretty scary, depending on what your outlook is. And it sort of keeps coming back to, well, what's your safe haven? And property just keeps on proving that, well, it gives you that buffer against AI invading your job and destroying your life or whatever. Gives you a buffer so that you can transition. It's also a great hedge against inflation. It's proven that it's a great hedge against inflation over the last 70 years in Australia, because it actually outpaces inflation, which is a good thing. And thirdly, globalization, 15-minute cities, you'll own nothing and be happy. Well, if you have a property, then you don't own nothing. And you've got somewhere where you can live and you can set the rules for within your dwelling. Now, we could go down the conspiracy rabbit hole and, yeah, well, I'll take the property off you and blah, blah, blah. But I think we're a very, very long way away from that in Australia, from anything like that happening. So all roads seem to point to property. Naturally, I would say that because I work for Dashdot. We love property. we love it as an asset class. We love what it can do. So another unique perspective that I wanted to ask you about when we were having our chat a couple of weeks ago, we jumped on the phone. We had a little bit of a chat about what we're going to talk about on this episode. And you mentioned a perspective being a single investor. and this is not something that we've really talked much about to other guests that we've had on. What's it like being single and being an investor? How's the perspective different?
Yes, well, I'm 43 years old. Unfortunately, I got divorced a few years ago. Didn't have any children, so yes, I'm a single investor in my early to mid 40s. So yeah, the again, risks and opportunities are quite unique. The opportunity is that fortunately I have a fairly good income thanks to my business, and I can make decisions by myself and keep my cost of living relatively low if I want to, and put money into investment. But there's also the risk. I need to make decisions by myself. It's nice in many ways to have a partner or someone else to make decisions with and plan your long-term future with, which I don't have at the moment. So yeah, the property portfolio is also a kind of risk mitigation because I don't have a partner to rely on. Many people in relationships would consider their partner part of their safety net, their financial safety net. But yeah, I need to think about it as a single person, and yeah, I guess it's partly long-term retirement planning as well. Yeah, it's quite a unique situation being an investor and being a single person. Traditionally, to buy one's first property, you'd need the combined income of two people in a couple, and I'm lucky that my income is high enough to buy property on my own, and now with the growing portfolio, that just keeps rolling. So yeah, it's a unique set of risks and opportunities being a single investor.
I mean, it's the freedom part of it sounds good. I shouldn't say that. I'm married. I'm going to get in trouble. The freedom part of that sounds great, right? Sort of like if you want to go to Barcelona for a weekend, you probably can, sort of thing. Just whimsically, oh well, this football team's playing, so I'm going to go and watch them. You can do those sorts of things, but without that safety net of, well, what happens if something goes wrong? Who's going to look after me? Who's going to pay the bills? That sort of thing. I guess again, sort of all roads lead to property. It seems like it's a nice way of, like, do you feel more at ease now that you've got a few?
Yes, I definitely do. I've got my portfolio growth plan with Dashdot, and we're aiming to keep growing the portfolio over the next 10 to 15 years. We're aiming to buy, I think it's 8 properties, of which I bought 2, and I should be buying the third one probably in the next 6 months. But yes, that definitely is part of my planning for, well, I'm in my early to mid 40s now, so it's part of my planning for my 50s and my 60s to have that additional income, and part of my retirement planning as well. Yeah, I definitely do feel more confident. It's a very deliberate decision to invest like this.
And you've also been weighing up what to do with super, whether to put more money in your super or to put it into property or even buy property within your super. How's that all sort of panning out at the moment? What's your current thought process?
Yeah, well, as I've been a freelancer for most of my working life, I have done the freelancer thing and not paid myself a whole lot of super. It's only really in the last few years that
Yep.
my
I can relate.
You can.
Yeah, guilty.
So it's only really in the last few years that my business has grown significantly, and I now have the fortunate problem of having to plan where I put my money. So I'm putting much of it in investments, but I'm also trying to catch up on years of not paying myself a lot of super. At the moment, I'm putting money into super, not thinking of doing a self-managed super fund in property yet, for the simple reason that I just want a bit of diversity in my investments. So the super is, obviously you get a bit of a tax concession for extra contributions to super, which is helpful at the moment. And it looks like most of my investment is going to be in property, having some money in super invested in indexed funds, however they do it, is not a bad thing from a risk mitigation point of view, spreading risk into different asset classes. But yeah, for me, I'm happy to have the majority of my investment in property.
All right. And so what's your vision for the property portfolio in 10 years' time? What's the dream? Is it concrete? Is it visualizable? Is it a little bit cloudy? Where's Peter in 10 years?
Well, years ago when I was listening to property podcasts, I would hear people say things like, "Oh, initially you're scrambling just to meet your basic needs, and then if you have some extra money, you can invest it, and then if you make quite a lot of money and you become a fairly wealthy person, it sort of opens up this philosophical question of what to do with this and how to make the world a better place. And I think in Dashdot terms, that's called your legacy. I've heard that referred to in earlier podcasts. So yeah, once I've taken care of my own basic needs and my own basic financial security and created myself a comfortable income and future, I guess I would look at legacy and looking at how to benefit others. So it's already been a privilege for me to be able to donate money from my business to causes that I care about, especially environmental causes. So yeah, I would like to be able to donate money in the future to causes that I care about and create opportunities for other people as well. One of the opportunities that my business and investment has given me is that I'm actually able to take the time to study music full time. So I'm studying music full time and also running my business, which is a bit hectic and crazy. But again, this is one of the things that I can do as a single guy because I don't have family obligations. So if I'm working on stuff at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, it's fine. I don't need to stop for dinner time.
That's the freedom part that sounds good.
That's the freedom part. So yeah, that's part of the legacy for me is I can do things like work on my music, study music, and I'm a writer, so I'm working on a novel. It's a long-term project that I've been working on for about 4 years now. So
Okay, what's the novel about? Are you allowed to tell us, or does that ruin it?
Yes, I'm supposed to have an elevator pitch, but my elevator pitch isn't that refined. Partly because I'm still working on the story. It's a sort of let's say it's a sort of rural dystopia set in South Africa. It's a sort of futuristic novel set deep in the countryside of South Africa, and it's to do with history and relationship with the land and belonging. So yeah, that's what I'm working on at the moment, and I'm actually going back to South Africa next month to do a trip with my dad, which I'm quite excited about. But yeah, looking forward to getting some inspiration.
The novel has a compelling protagonist with a redeemable flaw.
Of course. That's what we want. We always are interested in characters that are flawed, because all of us are flawed. We all have amazing potential and wonderful things, but we also have flaws. So yeah, that's what we want to see in characters.
Well, see, the heroes always need to have a redeemable flaw, right? So that we know that it's a flaw, but it's just them. The antagonist has an irredeemable flaw, and then you have the love interest, and hopefully she can stitch wounds, because that'll be handy in Act 2. It's sort of. I imagine you're probably not a play it by numbers writer. There's probably a fair bit more creativity that goes into it. It's not just following the formula, a Shakespearean 3-act wrapped up in MTV production values sort of thing. But anyway, all right, that's another rabbit hole we can dive down another day.
I know those formulas, and I have sort of planned out my novel a bit according to that. But I've only written about half of the first draft, and mostly that's the first half. So I'm still working on the second half. So far, it's just kind of like an unfolding sequence of tragedies. So one of the things I need to do in my writing is try and work out some redemption.
Give the audience a happy ending somewhere along the way. Give them a few small wins. All right. Well, I'll be very keen to read it when it comes out. How long do you reckon it'll be until the novel gets produced?
Oh, I'm going to try and finish the first draft this year, and then finish the second draft maybe in this first half of next year. So, I'm aiming to have it ready by mid next year.
Are you using AI to help?
No. I have been talking to several writers about that. I've got a friend who's a writer, who's a successful novelist who's published quite a few, and he says that he's been playing around with AI quite a bit. There are several different softwares that writers, novelists use and screenwriters use to keep track of the project easily, so you can swap bits around and fit it into a structure. And he was telling me about this product that has AI included, and it can start giving you suggestions. And yeah, that's kind of the new world for writing, is using AI. It's quite an interesting topic to discuss about, what's the value of art? Like, why do people like art and creativity? And traditionally, we'd say it's because of the human, recognizing the humanity. But if AI is doing it, oof.
Yeah, this is a topic we could dive down for weeks. We could dive into for weeks. Yes, what is the purpose of art? Is art purely the expression of beauty within the confines of a form? Or is there something else that we're supposed to be doing and thinking about it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I would say the expression of beauty within the confines or within the constraints of a form is probably, I'm not smart enough to be able to improve a definition or purpose of art beyond that. But it's a fascinating topic. And what does it mean to be human if AI is doing the art? Then what is the point of us? But we'll probably leave our loyal listeners on that fascinating little question to pose themselves and think about. And in the meantime, I guess the big moral of the story is you can have all these conversations. You can have AI coming along and having an impact on your job. You can have globalists and whatever their agenda is, it's published. They publish it, but it's always changing. And who really knows what's going on there? It sounds like a bit of a conspiracy theory, but it also sounds like at least half of it's true. Plus inflation, monetary systems all falling to pieces, immigration, all of these things. The constant that seems to help people get through all of that is property. And you're a shining example of that, Peter. So thank you so much for jumping on and sharing your journey and sharing a unique perspective as someone whose role and job and company is taking a bit of an impact from AI. Also someone who has a different perspective, being single and the pros and cons of that at your stage of life, and being able to balance the freedom with also the risk, because you don't have someone who's like backing you up on absolutely everything. It's been really, really interesting, and I'm really glad that you could jump on and share that with everyone.
Oh, great. Thank you, Emil. It's been really wonderful talking to you. And I've been listening to the Dashdot podcast on and off for many years. It was actually part of what led me to work with Dashdot. So it's a great privilege to be interviewed for the Dashdot podcast. It's a big milestone. Thank you for having me.
That's the best thing I can hear, really. Well, I'll stop talking because I don't want to ruin it. Thank you so much, Peter. And to everyone listening, we hope you'll tune in to the next episode. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Emil.